Hey, good day. Michael Didier here. Last week, we covered basically three things. We talked about clean food. We talked about a woman after childbirth, and we started the law of leprosy. How does the priest know that a man or a woman has a leprous sore? A nagah zara'at is what we call that. We'll come to that in a minute. Let's start with clean food just briefly. I want to reinforce this. I have people ask me about rabbits. Just the other day, someone wrote me and asked me about rabbits. And it sounds like there's someone who's been in learning Torah and wanting to learn Yehovah's ways for quite some time. But I think, how do we not understand that a rabbit is not a clean animal? Let's talk about Yehovah's directions just briefly that he gave us and we went through last week in chapter 11 of Leviticus. He says, among the animals, I'm on verse 3 right now, among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Okay, there it is right there. Of the behemah of the earth, animals is behemah. Behemah. Those are four-legged animals. All the four-legged animals, dinosaur animals, cat animals, dog animals, all the animals. Everything that has four legs. It's got, if we're going to eat it, it's going to have two things. It's going to have a divided hoof, we call it a cloven hoof, and it's going to chew the cud. I've got a picture of a cloven hoof on my blog. Let me just go there real quick, because I think it's important that we see these things. Under my clean food, under animals, here's what we have. Split hoof. There it is right there. That's a split hoof. We've got, here's a camel's hoof. It looks a little bit like it's a split hoof, but it's in reverse. A horse hoof is this one right here, not split. This is a split hoof right here. This is a pig's hoof. A pig has a split hoof, but it doesn't chew its cud. It's got to do two things. If it chews its cud, that means it's going to have multiple stomachs. A cow, a deer, those kinds of animals have multiple stomachs. Pig doesn't have a multiple stomach. Pig has a split hoof, but it doesn't have a multiple stomach. We gave us an example of the rabbit that has multiple stomachs, but it has paws. Doesn't have a hoof. So we know if it doesn't have a hoof, it's not edible. That means rabbits and squirrels and possums and so much of what people eat or have taken for food isn't food. The next one he talked about was fish. Here it is, fish. These you may eat from all that is in water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales. There it is. Easy peasy. We can figure this out. Split hooves, chews its cud. Fish, things that come in the water, have to have what? Fins and scales. I'm very thankful for that. Fins and scales. I probably get 200 reads a day, 150 to 200 reads a day, just on fins and scales. People searching for what is clean food and are clean in the waters. But I still have people all the time asking me about, well, what about lobster? What about shrimp? Fins and scales. Easy peasy. If it doesn't have both fins and scales, we don't eat it. Now I say we. You know, who's he talking to? Look, you guys. Speak to Israel's seed. Verse 2. Speak to Israel's seed. He's not talking to the Gentiles. He's not talking to the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. He's talking to the people who came out from the world and made themselves wholly his. Those are all the people that left Egypt. Both the native born, the Azra, who are known as Israel's seed, and the Ger, who dwell with them. When we came out, we called them the mixed heads of households, translated mostly by people as mixed multitude. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking about men, mixed heads of households. We're counting men, not the ladies, not the children. We came out 600,000. Israel's seed came out 600,000. In Numbers, chapter 1 or 2, we're going to see exactly 603,500, something like that. It's all men, not ladies. Why weren't the ladies numbered? Because they're part of the men. But he leads the men. And he's teaching the men what is clean food and what is unclean food. We've got to get this. Next, we talked about the birds. Birds was harder. He, instead of telling us what we can eat, he tells us what we can't eat. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. An abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. Now he's going to give us some very particular birds. He says eagle, vulture, buzzard, kite, falcon, after its kind. Raven, after its kind. He's giving us kinds, not, how do we say it? Not specifics. I mean, it is specifics. An eagle. We all know what an eagle is. But we're talking about eagle kind, vulture kind, buzzard kind, kite kind, falcon kind, ostrich kind, seagull kind, hawk kind, owl kind. Those are the ones that we have to not eat. That means all the other birds are okay to eat. I always have to ask, there's a big discussion. Chickens, ducks. Can you eat chickens? Can you eat ducks? Where do they fit into this list? They don't fit. They're clean. I have people that'll say, well, they eat bugs. They eat worms. Worms aren't clean. You know what? Yehovah says what is not clean. Let's just follow Yehovah and not try and build our own doctrines and theologies. Now, that said, I do see that primarily the things that we don't eat are things that eat dead animals. Pigs eat dead animals. The things in the fish that dwell at the bottom of the ocean primarily eat dead animals. The lobsters, the crabs, all that is eating the dead of the ocean. Last thing we talked about was the insects. Which insects can we eat? I hope that I gave you a decent understanding of these things that crawl on all their legs. They say creep on all fours. Four is there, but there's not a single insect that has 4 legs. So we're talking about creeping on all their legs. Most of them have 6 legs. Some have 8. Some have more. Obviously, the centipede has more than 8, doesn't it? But these are all creeping things that have jointed legs, flying, leaping on the earth. We saw in verse 22, it says, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket, the grasshopper. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that get translated by these things. Here's just a few of them. Many translations say grasshoppers, crickets, katydids, in addition to locusts. But grasshoppers, crickets, katydids, well, they do have wings, are not flyers. Their wings are more for sound. And when was the last time anybody dreaded a swarm of katydids or a swarm of crickets? Oh, duck, run for your life. No, that's not the problem. We're talking about locusts, and it appears to me that the words that are being used here are more in line with locust. I always say the clean animals of the earth are locust, 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 and locust. He's giving us different kinds of locust. I've got a blog also in the same spot down below that talks about these kinds and what these things mean. The devouring locust, the swarming locust, the cargo locust, the kargav locust, after its kind. Well, those are the things we talked about with clean food last week. Next, we moved on to the woman after childbirth. Remember, if a woman has a son, she's going to be unclean for 7 days. And on the 8th day, the son is going to be circumcised. But she's going to continue, this is what it says, verse 4, she's going to continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. So we had 7 days. The 8th day is the first day of the 33 days, the start of the 33 days, for a total of 40 days. For a son that she's going to remain unclean. I think this is a godsend. It appears to me this is a way for the woman to recover from childbirth, to be kept safe. Her husband's not going to be taking her during that 40 days. If she has a female, he's not going to be taking her for 80 days. Because everything is doubled for a female. She's going to be unclean 2 weeks. And then she's going to continue in her blood of her purification 66 days. 14 plus 66 is the 80 days. Twice as much as for a male child. Why? Your guess is as good as mine. Yehovah knows the difference. Perhaps it takes more for a woman to put out a female child. I don't know. At the end of those days, she's going to come and get purified. The days of her purification are fulfilled. This is what we're talking about, purification. Continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, she shall bring to the priest. She's going to come and bring it to the priest. She's not going in to the tabernacle. She's not going into the temple. She's going to bring it to the priest. She's going to come to the court is where she's going to come to. The door of the tent of meetings is what it says. She's going to bring 2 things, a lamb, 1 year old. I would guess this is a male lamb, but I don't remember seeing that. Yeah, it is a male lamb. Male lamb. It's the same thing that we would use for Passover, a lamb or a goat. This specifically says a lamb, though. And she's going to use that for a burnt offering. And she's also going to bring a turtle dove as a kata'ah, as for sin. It's just for sin. They always want to put offering. I said burnt offering as an olah. Bring it to the first year for an olah. And a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a kata'ah for sin. She's going to bring it to the door of the tent of meeting. Well, that was what we were talking about last week regarding, how do we call that? Woman after childbirth. 13. We started the law of leprosy. I find this hard. I find this, Carissa said that she feels like it's for today, but I just don't see it as pertinent to today as some of the other things that Yehovah gives us. One thing I want to suggest also, and I didn't mention it last week, is it appears to me that this, what do we call it? Naga, here it is. Naga za ra'at. Ra'at. The accent is on the second syllable. Ra'at. 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 Za ra'at. Naga za ra'at. A leprous plague. This is something the priests are going to discern from the patches on our skin. If it turns raw, where we actually have pus coming out, a boil, a burn that turns deeper and more inflamed, it's probably going to be seen as a leprous sore. Seems like a yellow hair or a white hair are some of the things that the priests are looking for, depending on whether it's swelling, depending on whether it's on the head of a bald man or the face of a woman, or they have different things that we're going to talk about, or that we did talk about. But we're talking about discerning a leprous sore that is, in fact, something that's going to get you kicked out of the camp. You're not going to be able to stay in the camp. We talked about how it may relate to the zav, the issue, an issue that's coming from the body. We're going to talk about issues today. We have lots of things to talk about. Things that I assumed were sin for a long time and found out it's not sin. We've learned a lot of lies in our Christian ideas. I want to set some people free today. So, we talked about leprous sores. Today, we're going to talk, it says, this is the law of the leprous sore in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or the woof. Remember, that's how it's woven in a loom. The warp runs up and down, and the woof is what's going back and forth. Or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Remember, who's pronouncing it clean and unclean? It's the priest. Priests have an awesome, awesome responsibility to the people. It's how we are kept safe. They're Yehovah's representative on the earth. Wow. Got to have some respect for the priests, don't we? Well, let's continue. Today we're going to talk about the cleansing of the leper. He's been kicked out of the camp, and now he's starting to show healing. Let's read about that first, and then we're going to talk about the house plague and cleansing the house of this leprous plague. It's interesting that they called it a leprous sore when we were talking about people. But when we start talking about the homes, we're going to see they're going to talk about a leprous plague. Same word, but they're translating it differently. Do they have to translate it differently? Who puts plagues on his people? Can Satan put plagues on Yehovah's people? You know what? I think we're going to see today that it appears that it's Yehovah who puts plagues on his people. Let's find out. Then Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest." Most don't see that he's brought to the priest. "And the priest shall go out of the camp. Oh, well, look at this. The priest is coming out of the camp. He's brought to the priest, but the priest is coming out of the camp. So which is it? Do we have one or the other? And the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the leprosy is healed in the leper, then the priest shall command to take for him. Command to take for him. Who's he commanding to take for him? And somebody else besides the man himself? Take for him who is to be cleansed. It almost sounds like there's a third party there, doesn't it? Who is to be cleansed, 2 living and clean birds. It says 2 living clean birds. It doesn't say and, it just says 2 living clean birds. 2 living clean birds. Doesn't have to be a turtle dove, apparently. Doesn't have to be a pigeon, apparently. Just has to be 2 living clean birds. That's all it says. Cedar wood. What is that? A sliver of cedar wood? A stick, a branch of cedar wood? Perhaps. A scarlet. I always thought of this as a scarlet thread. I thought maybe this is something that we're going to use the scarlet thread to wrap all these things together. And hyssop. These are the things that we are supposed to bring to Yehovah. Bring to the priest. And the priest shall command the one of the birds to be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. Earthen vessel over running water. How do we get the running water? Again, I think there's a third party here that is going to, one's going to be pouring the water, the other one's going to be slaughtering the birds. How do they slaughter the birds? Just take off its head? Could be. Just twist its head off. Ew. I slaughtered another chicken yesterday. You don't want to just twist its head off. That's not a good death for the bird, I don't think. I tried to cut his neck just where the artery is and let it bleed out and fall asleep. Nice, quiet, peaceful death. They're not saying that here. It just says that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel. Shakat. I'm sure it's shakat. Killed. Let's take a quick look. Always good to know what we're talking about. Killed. Shakat. There it is right there. And shakat. The bird. Shakat. Not slaughter. It would be a slaughter if we were going to eat it, but we're not going to eat it, are we? Shakat the bird. In an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take the cedar wood, the scarlet, the hyssop, and dip them in the living bird, in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. Can you imagine how traumatic this must be for the living bird? He's going to be taken with the stick, with the scarlet, with the hyssop, and he's going to be dipped into that pitcher with the water and the blood. Then they're going to take him and they're going to shake him on the woman or the man who's going to be cleaned. I forget if it's 7 times. It might be a number of times. Let's find out. Yeah, here it is right here. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird loose in the open field. He who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and wash himself in water that he may be clean. Pubic hairs? All hairs? Leg hairs? Every hair? Sounds like. After that he shall come into the camp, and he shall come into the camp, and shall stay outside his tent 7 days. We're going to come into the camp, but we're not going to come into our house. We're going to stay outside of our house for 7 days. But on the 7th day, he shall shave all the hair off his head, and his beard, and his eyebrows, all his hair. Maybe it's not pubic hair. Maybe it's hair and eyebrows and all his hair. Maybe that's what all his hair means. He shall wash his clothes and wash his body in water, and he shall be clean. This is the cleansing of the leper. On the 8th day, he shall take 2 male lambs, whole and alive, and 1 ewe, female lamb, of the 1st year, whole and alive, 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a minka, and a measure of oil, a log of oil. We're talking about a measure of oil. Here it is right here. A measure of oil, shaman, grease, especially liquid. Log, oh, here it is, log. Log or measure for liquids. I think measure of oil is almost a better way to understand it. What are we talking about with a log of oil? No, I think we're talking about a measure of oil, a specific amount of oil. Then the priest who makes him clean shall present the man. Now look at this. This is ha-ish. Ha-ish. Is there something different for a woman? Why do they use this word? Women can get leprosy. Obviously, Miriam had leprosy, didn't she? She had to stay outside the camp for 7 days. She probably had to go through this cleansing process. Wow, that must have said volumes to the other ladies who were supposed to be covered by their man, who were speaking out against their man, like she did. I'm a prophet, don't you know? I can do it just like Moses did it. Oh, can you, dear? Interesting that he didn't give Aaron leprosy. He gave Miriam leprosy. He bawled Aaron out, but he didn't get leprosy. And who was it that gave it to her? It was Yehovah. It was Yehovah who gave Moses that sign. Put your hand in your shirt. Comes out leper. Put it back in. Clean. Remember? Is that where the leper sore comes from, Yehovah? Is it a punishment? Oh, Father, keep it away from me, please. All right, let's continue. Then the priest who makes him clean shall present the man ha-ish, who is to be made clean, and those things before Yehovah's face, at the door of the tent of meetings, the tent of Moed. And the priest shall take 1 male lamb and bring it as a asham. Remember the asham, a trespass offering? And a measure of oil, and wave them as a present before Yehovah. No, before Yehovah's face. Then he shall kill Shakat the lamb in the place where he kills the kata'ah and the olah in a holy place. For as the kata'ah is the priest's, so is the trespass. This animal is going to be food for the priest. I wonder if it says kill or if it says shakat. But he also says it's going to be food for the priest, doesn't he? There's shakat again. Breach offering, the kata'ah, and the burnt offering. That's where these 2 things are killed. As the kata'ah is the priests, so is the Hashem. Remember, this is for an Hashem, is the priest. We saw that in past weeks. The Hashem and the Kata'ah both are food for the priests. It is most holy, Kodesh Kodeshim. That's what it says. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass, and the priest shall put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the right thumb of his right hand. Right thumb, right hand, and on the big toe of the right foot. Kind of what we did for the priests. What does Yehovah have in mind with this? Is this something that he does for a woman as well? He's talking about an ish right now, but he doesn't give instructions for the woman. Is she treated differently? I want to know more. I got too many questions. And the priest shall take some of the measure of oil and pour it into the palm of his left hand. Then the priest shall dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and shall sprinkle some of the oil with his forefinger 7 times before Yehovah's face. He's going to be taking it towards the altar. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Probably dip it every time, I suppose. And the rest of the oil in his hand, the priest shall put some on the tip of his right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the blood of the trespass. Again, offering I don't like to read. It's not there. On the blood of the trespass. Remember, he just put the blood on top of the right ear, the right thumb, the right toe. The rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand, he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed. So now he's going to be, in a sense, anointed, I suppose. He's getting it poured on his head. So the priest shall make a covering for him before Yehovah's face. This is all happening outside of the tent of meeting, probably on the north side of the altar where we do all of our slaughtering. Then the priest shall bring a kata'ah and make a covering for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanliness. Afterwards, he shall kill the olah. So here we're talking about killing the olah. This is interesting. I hadn't seen this before. It says the priest has already used a male lamb, so there is only a male lamb and a ewe left. Ewe lamb left, male and female left. But the kata'ah requires a female goat. Ugh, this does not work. Well, because we're supposed to use for the common man as a sin offering. Maybe it's because it's an Hashem. Maybe that could be because it's an Hashem and it's not a kata'ah. That'd be my guess. Let's just leave that then. That would make sense to me then. Then the priest shall bring the kata'ah and make atonement for him. No, that says a kata'ah. What is he bringing? Was the... start here. Then he shall kill the lamb in the place where he kills the sin offering and the burnt offering. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass offering. Okay, so we did that. And the priest shall offer a sin offering and make atonement for him who is to be cleansed. What are we taking? It doesn't say what we're taking. Let's see if we can figure it out. Then the priest shall bring the kata'ah and make atonement for him who is to be cleansed. This says, if any one of the common people sins unintentionally, it's kata'ah by doing something against any of the commandments of Yehovah for anything which he ought to be done. He's guilty. All right, well, it's not that he's done anything wrong. Maybe he has. Maybe that's why Yehovah has put that on him, that disease, that leprous plague. Or if his sin, which he has committed, comes to his knowledge, then he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish. They say without blemish. Remember, we're talking about live and whole. Alive and whole, not without blemish. Alive and whole. Different word for without blemish, without defect. For his kata'ah, which he has committed. Maybe that's what we're using. Remember we had to bring, I got to find it. I just got to find it. Male lamb and offer it as a trespass offering. We did that. Two male lambs without blemish and a ewe lamb of the first year. It doesn't say what they're going to be used for. So we already used one of the male lambs. Now we're using the second male lamb. Well, if it's a burnt offering, it's got to be a male. So that would be a male. Sin offering. Where did we leave off here? Then the priest shall bring the sin offering and make atonement for him who is to be cleansed. All right, well, that would be the sin offering. That would be a male goat because the female or the male goat's got to be used for the burnt offering. So that would make sense. I like it when things fit together. Do you see that? We're supposed to bring a female without a female whole and alive for the kata'ah, and that's what we're doing. We're going to use the female ewe. Then the priest shall bring the kata'ah, make atonement, make covering for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanliness. Afterwards, he shall kill the olah. That's going to be the male. That's going to be the last male. And the priest shall bring the olah and the minka. Remember, we had a minka of, I think it was oil, on the altar. And the priest shall make a covering for him, and he shall be cleansed. But if he's poor and cannot afford it, then he shall take one male lamb as a trespass offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, 1/10 of an ephah. It was 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil. That's the minka offering, and the measure of oil. But now, instead of a second male lamb and a ewe lamb for the burnt offering and for the sin offering, we are going to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. One shall be for sin, and the other shall be for olah, for kata'ah and for olah. Again, it doesn't matter when you're talking birds, whether it's male or female. And he shall bring them to the priest on the 8th day of his cleansing. Remember, he's been outside his tent for 7 days. This is when this is happening. To the door of the tent of meeting before Yehovah's face. And the priest shall take the lamb of the trespass offering, that's the male lamb, and the log of oil, and the priest shall wave them as a present. Let's make it present before Yehovah. Wave them as a present before Yehovah's face. Then he shall kill the lamb of the trespass. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass, doing exactly the same thing, and put it on the tip of his right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot. And the priest shall pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand. Then the priest shall sprinkle it with his finger, some of the oil that is in his left hand, 7 times before Yehovah's face. It appears that he's not sprinkling it on the man. He's just sprinkling it before Yehovah's face. Again, where is this going on? It appears to me that it's before the tent of meetings on the north side of the brazen altar. They call it the Olah altar. Same place we bring the kata'ah. The rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand, he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed, to make a covering for him before Yehovah's face. A kafar, a covering. And he shall bring one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, which either one, such as he can afford, such as he is able to afford. Again, he's redundant. The one as a kata'ah, and the other as an olah, with the minka. So the priest shall make a covering for him who is to be cleansed before Yehovah's face. He says, this is the law of the leprous sore, who cannot afford the usual cleansing. Remember, the usual cleansing was 2 male lambs and a ewe lamb, female lamb. Next, we're going to change gears. He says, and Yehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when you have come into Canaan's land, this is not for us right now, this is a house. Mortar and brick, it looks to me like. When you have come into the Canaan's land, which I give you as a possession. Who's he talking to, men or women? It's a possession. I think he's talking to the men. And I put the leper's plague in a house, in the land of your possession. A leper's plague. Now calling it now a leper's plague instead of a leper's sore. Still the same word exactly. Who put it on? And I put a leprous plague on the house. Yehovah put the leprous plague on the house, didn't he? Why? I want to know more. And he who owns the house comes and tells the priest. It's the men who own the house. Comes and tells the priest, saying, it seems to me that there is some plague in the house. Then the priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest goes into it. Did you hear that? We're going to empty the house before the priest goes in. Why? Isn't it interesting that if we get the stuff out now, when he declares it unclean, the stuff that's outside the house is still going to be clean? Here. This is the priest. Ha-Kohen, the priests, shall command that they empty the house before Ha-Kohen goes in to examine the plague, that all that is in the house may not be made unclean. And afterwards the priest shall go in and examine the house. The priest has incredible authority, doesn't he? Once the house is made unclean, it and all that is in it, furniture and people, become unclean also. And he shall examine the plague. And indeed, if the plague is in the walls of the house, with ingrained streaks, greenish or reddish, which appear to be deep in the wall. We're not looking at just superficial things on the wall. This is stuff that, if you were to dig into it a bit, you're going to see that it's in the plaster itself. I'm not sure what word I was translating here. Shakarura, depression, hollow streak, ingrained. It must be the ingrained thing we're talking about right here. Feminine noun meaning depression, a hollow streak, or of a branch. It refers to a depression on the walls of a house in Israel, indicating some kind of mold or fungus attack. A leprous plague, a naga zara'at. Deep in the wall. Then the priest shall go out of the house, of the door of the house, and shut up the house 7 days. 7 days. How come it's always 7 days? Is this something that only happens on a Sabbath? Or can this begin anytime? I suppose it must begin anytime. You have to deal with it. But why is it always 7 days? Not 6 days, not 8 days, 7 days. And the priest shall come again on the 7th day. And look, and indeed, if the plague has spread on the walls of the house, he must somehow mark where the plague is. Maybe scratch the wall, perhaps, so that we can see if it's going to grow. And indeed, if the plague has spread on the wall of the house, then the priest shall command that they take away the stones in which is the plague, and they shall cast them into an unclean place outside the city. We're talking about more than stones. We're talking about mortar that's holding the stones together as well. I would think that the plague is more in the mortar than it is in the stones, depending on the kind of stone that you have, I suppose. Taking it outside the city. Talking about hazardous waste, aren't we? Hazardous materials. This truly is hazardous materials. Take away the stones which is the plague. Stones in which is the plague. And they shall cast them into an unclean place outside the city. I guess every city has to have an unclean place. And he shall cause the house to be scraped inside, all around. And the dust that they scrape off, they shall pour out in an unclean place outside the city. You see how this hazardous material, are these guys wearing masks? Do they wear anything to protect themselves? I want to know more. Then they shall take other stones, put them in the place of those stones, and he shall take other mortar and plaster the house. So we are talking about some kind of mortar that's going on, holding these bricks together. This is the dust that they have to clean up, the plaster, the mortar. Now if the plague comes back and breaks out of the house, or breaks out in the house. So we've replaced all the walls, gotten rid of the dust, gotten rid of the mortar, replastered everything. Looks good, looks clean. But now here's the mold starting to grow back again. Look what happens. Now if the plague comes back and breaks out in the house, after he has taken away the stones, after he has scraped the house, and after it is plastered, the priest shall come and look. And indeed, if the plague has spread in the house, it is an active leprosy. Oh, I put now if. It's and if. And if. I suppose it could be translated now, but and is what it appears to say above. And if, then the priest shall come and look, and indeed, if the plague has spread in the house, it is an active leprosy. A contagious, here's the word, zara'at. That's the one that we have for leprosy. Here is the ma'ar, a verb to prick, to be painful, to be destructive. It refers to skin disease, an eruption that is destructive, hurtful, or some growth or malignancy found in a structure or materials of a house. That's how we're using it today in chapter 14. Modifies the word sararat. Each time it is used to modify briar or thorn. This is something that is, it's there. We can't get rid of it. I looked at other places where they translated it, contagious zara'at. Contagious leprosy, fretting leprosy, persistent leprous disease, corroding leprosy are some of the other ways that it's translated. And he shall break down the house, its stones, its timber, and all the plaster of the house. And he shall carry them outside the city to an unclean place. He's got to demolish the building at this point. You can't allow a building that is got a contagious, fretting leprosy be in it. Got to get rid of it. In your city, I mean. Moreover, you see that, this is the priest. He's the one who's saying whether this house can stand or go. But it's the only house I've got. Sorry, it's got to go. What am I going to do? I don't know. Listen what he says. Moreover, he who goes into the house at all while it is shut up shall be unclean until evening. And he who lies down in the house shall wash his clothes, and he who eats in the house shall wash his clothes. They're still going to be unclean until evening. But now because we're eating in the house and we're washing or laying down in the house, we got to wash our clothes as well. And if the priest comes in and examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread. So in one case, the plague had spread and we had to demolish the house. Now the plague is gone. If the priest comes and examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread in the house, after the house was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean because the plague is healed. So here now is how we're going to cleanse the house. We had to cleanse the leper, and now we're going to cleanse the house from its leprous plague as well. And he shall take to cleanse the house, same things, 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. Can you guess what he's going to do? Same thing as he did before. Then he shall kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel, in an earthen vessel over running water. And he shall take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet, and the living bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird and in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. So instead of sprinkling the leper, we're going to sprinkle the house 7 times. And he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird. Did it say any kind of bird in particular? Are we talking about any clean bird? What did he say? 2 birds. He shall take and cleanse the house, 2 birds. Doesn't say what kind of birds. All right. And he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird and the running water, and the living bird with the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet. And he shall let the living bird loose outside the city in an open field, and make a covering for the house, and it shall be clean. Makes a covering for the house. You know, we always want to use that word, atonement. Make atonement for the house. They always want to do that. Folks, it's not atonement, it's a covering. We're making a covering for the house. Is this for protection, perhaps? We're going to make a covering for Aaron, his house, the other priests, the ark, the golden altar, and the tabernacle, and then finally all Israel. All Israel. We're talking about Israel's seed. If they're covered, their families are covered. Not talking about the Ger who dwells with them necessarily. They have to become Israel to be covered. That's why it's important that you don't stay a ger more than a year. Once you join yourself to Israel, at Passover, you get to become one of the Ezra. This is the law of the leprous sore, the leprous plague. Let's call it what it is. Nagad Zara'at. And scale for the leprosy of a garment, of a house, for a swelling and a scab and a bright spot. Those are things we talked about last week. To teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. This is the conclusion of Leviticus chapters 13 and 14. This is why he's saying it's the law. These are the things we talked about last week. Swelling, scab, bright spot, leprous plague, and scale. All right, let's move ahead. This is an interesting chapter, I think. It says, and Yehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, speak to Israel's seed and say to them, when any man has a discharge, he's speaking to Israel's seed. They're going to instruct their women, their daughters, their sons, their servants, and their maidservants, probably in the ger who dwells with them. Who's going to instruct their sons and their daughters, their wives and their servants and their maidservants? Moses and Aaron don't instruct women, they instruct their men. It's subtle, but this is so very important for you to see. What we're going to talk about now is called a chiasm. I think this is really an interesting construction of how this chapter is put together. He starts with an introduction. Here it is right here. Then he talks about male abnormal zav, which is a zuv, an unclean issue that makes a man unclean to others. Then he talks about a male normal issue, a male normal zav. So first we have an unclean zav, an abnormal zav. Then we have the normal zav. Then we have a male female normal zav. Here, let me do it like this. If I do edit here, you can see there's kind of a X, if you will, that goes like this. Can you see that? The D goes from the bad one to the good one, male and female. And then he has female normal, female abnormal, and then conclusion. It's called a chiasm. It's a construction. We saw it before. I remember commenting about ABBA. Kind of the same kind of construction, chiasm. Why is it important to know what a zav and a zuv is and how to be cleansed from these issues? These are issues coming from the body, issues that are coming from the body. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to go back to my Bible here. He says, speak to Israel's seed and say to them, when any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. What kinds of discharges are we talking about? Any man. Look at this. This is so interesting. Ish. We've talked about this before. We just saw it today. Kodesh, Kodeshim. Most holy. This is ish. Any man. Any man. King, priest, leader, common man, ger, servant, any man. Talking about the zuv, the abnormal zav, the abnormal issue. We are pronounced unclean and have to leave the camp. Why? Because we don't want to make others unclean. This is talking about men right now. It says, he who has an unclean issue is going to be separated. You know what? An unclean issue has to be separated. Is it an issue or is it an unclean issue? And are both unclean, but one is normal and one's abnormal? Probably that's what we should use as an abnormal issue versus a normal issue. Maybe that would be a better way to say that, which I guess is what I did, a male abnormal zav, an issue. Look at this. This is the word that we're talking about. It's zav. They don't even have this particular word in Strong's. Just zav. They have a zav with a yod in front of it, or not a yod, a vav in between it. See that? That's 2101. But this is just a zav. Zayin, bet, zav. There's no Strong's number for this Hebrew word. When I go to this, look at this. I can go to this and yeah, see, when you go to this, they want to make it 2100, but it's the same word. This is a zav. This has no vav in it. It's just not there. None of these are that word. But when you go to Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible, same word. Did I get it? Let me click on it again. Here we go. Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. Here is the zav. It's the root. Can you see that all right? Let me open this up. It's the root. So it's either yellow or it gets translated as issue. I think issue is what we're talking about. It's an issue that's coming from our body. His issue that is unclean. This is the unclean one. So we have, using this verse, let me see if I have even, no strong word for the Hebrew. Zav is any issue that comes from the body, male or female. Urine, excrement, spit, sneeze, nasal mucus, and all others are all zav. Yeah, he'll talk about some other things here in verse 3. Here is zuv. Zuv. A verb meaning to gush, to flow. It refers to water that pours out of a rock. It refers to honey, milk that flows on the land. It describes an active flowing discharge from a person's body. The leprous plague that is deep and oozing is something that you've got to get out of the camp so you don't spread it. These are related, and both of them are going to get us kicked out of the camp. Let's go to verse 3. I think we've covered. Here's the zav issue. We were just looking at in Hebrew, Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. Verse 3. He says, and it shall be his uncleanliness in regard to his discharge, whether his body runs with the discharge or his body is stopped up by his discharge. It is uncleanliness. This could be a venereal disease, I suppose, that's running from his penis. It could be something that's coming from constipation, diarrhea. All right. Every bed. This is for a man. Every bed is unclean on which he has the discharge. Here, look at this is. We're not using the zuv now, or the zav. We're using the zuv. See that? Zuv, zuv, zuv. Discharge. Here it is right here. Discharge, discharge, discharge. They're all zuv. They're not zav. They're zuv. Every bed is unclean on which he has the discharge. Here they're saying the zav. So a zuv is a zav. You see that? One is clean. One is unclean. The zuv is, no, one is normal and one is abnormal. Let's say it like that. And everything on which he sits shall be unclean. This is what's going on with the woman when she's in her menses. When she has a zuv, menses is not a zuv, it's a zav, but it's still something that is going to spread uncleanliness in the house. Every bed is unclean in which he who has the discharge lies. And everything on which he sits shall be unclean. And whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. He who sits on anything which he has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. This is a serious thing to have in our camp. We know to beware of women, but to beware of men is something altogether different, isn't it? He who sits on anything which he who has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. And he who touches the body of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean in the evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, then he shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. These are all things. Remember, if you got spit on by somebody, sat on his chair, laid in his bed, you're unclean. You got to wash your clothes, be unclean until evening. Bathe and be unclean until evening. If you go to Yehovah's temple, you're going to defile the temple and put your own body at risk, because Yehovah doesn't want to have his sanctuary made unclean. How about, one of the reasons that we do Yom Kippurim every year is to re-cleanse that tent of meetings, to re-cleanse the things that are in Yehovah's face, if you will. Is it because we accidentally touch things that are unclean and come into his presence unknowing that we're been made unclean? I think it is. We don't know all the things that can make us unclean. We have to have a pretty disciplined society to keep others safe and to guard who comes into Yehovah's presence. We don't want to let people come in to Yehovah's presence, yet men come into Yehovah's presence unclean. Let's go to verse 9. Any saddle on which he who has the discharge rides, discharge, we're still talking about the zav, but remember, we're talking about the zuv here. This is hazav, the discharge. Yeah, so we're still talking about a discharge, but we're talking about a zuv. A zuv zav. I know, strange, huh? Whoever touches anything that is under him shall be unclean until evening. He who carries any of those things shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Your servant unsaddles your horse. Your servant's going to be made unclean. And whomever the one who has the discharge touches and has not rinsed his hands in water. Can you touch somebody if you've rinsed your hands in water? Maybe that's what he's saying. He shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Remember, we're talking about things on which he sat on, things on which he laid on. I have to think about his bottom. Things which he laid on, things which he sat on, and a saddle. We're all talking about bottom related, potentially. Perhaps what he's saying is that you can touch somebody if you've washed your hands first. That would make sense, I guess. So how does my translation, what I was thinking, the one with the issue who touches someone without rinsing his hands first will make the other person unclean. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're talking about. All right, here it says the vessel of earth. This would be a earthen vessel of earth, that he who has the discharge touches shall be broken. And every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. Clay vessel has the discharge, the zab, which is a zuv. Remember, we're still talking about the abnormal issue, or lack thereof, if they have constipation, I suppose. The vessel of earth, the clay vessel, that he who has the discharge touches shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. And when he has a discharge, and when he who has the discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, bathe in his body in running water, and he shall be clean. Running water. Running water. We got to find a river. This is once the discharge stops. On the 8th day, he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before Yehovah's face at the door of the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest. Then the priest shall bring, this man brings 2 birds to the door. He does not go in. Maybe he doesn't go in. Brings them to the door of the tent of meeting. Gives them to the priest. Yeah, maybe going in before he's made clean, that would make sense, wouldn't it? So he'd have to be at the door of the tabernacle, the court, that door. Can't go in if you're not clean. To the door of the tent of meeting, same place that the woman went. Give them to the priest. Then the priest shall bring them, the one for a kata'ah, the other for an olah. So the priest shall make a covering for him before Yehovah's face, because of his discharge. If any man has an emission of semen. Now this is the next one that we're talking about. Here it is right here. We had A, introduction, B, abnormal, C, normal. This is a normal function. A semen emission is a normal zav. Going to make you unclean until evening, but it's a normal zav. If any man, again, are we talking about man? This is a good translation of this word. Shakabah, laying down sexual act. It's an emission. The word zav or zuv is not used anywhere in this verse. Look at that. They don't use zav or zuv anywhere in this verse. You're not going to use it in the next verse either. It is not used anywhere in verse 16, 17, or 18. 18 is the man and female sexual act. Talking about semen. Zara, seed. There it is right here, Zara. An emission of semen. A shekabah of semen. Copulation. It can be copulation, it can be masturbation, it can be a wet dream. An emission of semen is what we're talking about. I wonder, I've got it someplace, I'll have to find it. We're talking about the man who goes to war and has an emission, what they call it, a nightly occurrence. A nightly occurrence. He is unclean. He's got to leave the camp. He's got to leave the camp because he doesn't want to make the camp that Yehovah is dwelling in unclean. Well, that says volumes about having women in our camp in wartime. Isn't going to happen, you guys. There are no ladies that are going to be fighting. Unless you're Israel, the state, or other countries like ours that lets women into war. No, it's not going to happen. It's not supposed to happen. These are more of the abominations that are going on in the land. If any man has an emission of semen, then he shall wash his body in water and be unclean until evening. And any garments and any leather on which there is semen, it shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. That's it. That's all it is. Wash and be unclean. It's a normal emission for a man. A nocturnal emission, ejaculation by self, or your woman, or oral sex. Torah does not prohibit any of these activities. What? I was taught for years that masturbation was a sin. Oh, where's that in Torah? He says you're going to be unclean until evening. You got to wash your clothes, wash yourself, and be unclean until evening. That's it. It's a normal zav. Also, here's the male and female now. Also, when a woman lies with a man, and there is, same word, shekabah of zara. Shekabah, is that what it was? Shekabah. Shekabah of zara. They shall bathe in water and be unclean until evening. That's it. It's a normal zav. Not contagious, not going to make anybody else unclean. Funny that Yehovah has us leave the camp for this one. I mean, a nightly emission when we're going to war. So now, here is the woman's normal. I use the purple as the new idea. The 15 tells me on this color, just tells me that there's a note. And then the green tells me this is the normal zav, the normal emission. We're talking about a zav. This says her zav. Again, there's not a Strong's number for Zayin bet. Zav. Her zav. Not zuv. Doesn't say zuv. It's a zav. Her zav. Here we're talking about a zav issue of dam. An issue of blood. If a woman has a zav, and the zav from her body is dam, she shall be set apart 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. You know what? This is really hard to do in this day and age. We have not the infrastructure to keep ourselves separate when our women are in their menses. When my woman is in her menses, in her period, we have shared things that we use all the time. She's touching things and using things and eating things that I eat. I'm in a perpetual state of uncleanliness. And I find that frustrating. I used to teach people that you should have your woman sleep in another bed. And we have 2 beds. But if you're unclean, are you going to be more unclean? What do we do? I find this very frustrating. Ideally, we should have a separate house that our women can go to. Would it be outside of the camp? It's a normal zav, not the zav zuv. Everything that she touches, well, here, look what it says. Everything that she lies on. Here, this is verse 20. I guess I got to finish 19. She shall be set apart 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. So she can make any man that she touches unclean. Unlike the man who has a normal zav and a nocturnal emission, he's not going to make other people unclean. But the woman's zav of blood will make anyone that she touches unclean until evening. Everything that she lies on during her, this word that we're using here is this word nada. Nada. During her period, during her impurity is the way they're translating it here. Her separation shall be unclean. Everything that she lies on, everything that she touches, she's going to make unclean. Everything that she lies on shall be unclean, and everything that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. I wonder if this is where cooties comes from. But in this understanding, men have cooties too, don't they? That was the abnormal zav, which was a zuv for the man. This is where it comes from. I know it's a child thing, but maybe there's more to this story than we know. Everything that she lies on during her nada shall be unclean, and everything that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. And whoever touches anything that she sat on shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If anyone is on her bed, or anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. And if a man lies with her, so that her impurity is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days. And every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. Now, we've got to use some discernment here. Any man who lies with her so that her impurity, her nada, is on him, her blood is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. Now, look at this. This is an accidental contact with her issue. There are severe consequences for purposeful contact with her nada. Here, look at this. Here's nada, separation. We already talked about this. It says, intimacy with a woman in her dava shall get them cut off from Israel. Why do I have dava? Intimacy with a woman in her dava gets them cut off from Israel, gets them both cut off from Israel. Look what it says. You shall not approach a woman in order to have sexual relations with her when she is unclean from her time of dava. Oh, here it is. If a man goes to bed with a woman in her menstrual period, that's the dava, and has sexual relations with her, he has exposed the source of her blood. She has exposed the source of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from their people. Dava, menses. There it is right there, menses. So one, what we're talking about here in verse 24 is accidental. It has started while we are in the sexual copulation. The other one is done on purpose. We know she's in her dava, her menses, and we're going to take her anyway. Not a good idea. Get you kicked out of Israel. You don't want to get kicked out of Israel. You work too hard to become Israel. This is why we do what we do. We want to become Yehovah's people. Don't do things that are going to get kicked out from among Yehovah's people. Yeah, there's dava right there. Sick, menstruation, adjective referring to a woman's menstrual state, menstrual cloth. Yeah. All right. Good. I'm glad we figured that out. If a woman has a discharge of blood. So now we're talking about the last one, which was the abnormal zuv. Zav. The zav, the zuv. If a woman has a discharge, a zuv. Now we're going to use that particular word, zuv. This is the 2101 word that we were talking about. An issue of blood beyond what is normal. If a woman has a running issue, look at, they're using it twice. Zuv, zuv, a running issue. One is a verb, one is as a noun. Of her blood many days beyond the time of her nidah. Or if it runs, there it is again, zuv, as a verb. If it runs beyond the time of her nidah, all the days of her zuv, of her uncleanness, she shall be as in the days of her nidah. She is unclean. In other words, this is something that's going beyond the normal. This is abnormal. She doesn't usually go this long. Something's wrong. This is the zuv. This is the thing that's probably going to get us moved out of the camp. Are we moved out of the camp, moved out of the house? We're moved out of the house, perhaps, so we don't contaminate the other people, especially the other men in the house. Those who may be going to Yehovah's temple. But this is a more serious condition. Remember, this is what we were talking about. This is the last one. This B, female abnormal zav, which is a zuv. An unclean issue, an abnormal issue that makes a woman unclean to others. Every bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, the bed of her nidah. And whatever she sits on shall be unclean as in the days of her nidah. We're treating it the same way. Whoever touches these things shall be unclean. He shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, her zuv, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. On the 8th day, this is the same thing that happened with the man who had the zuv. Unclean 7 days, and then on the 8th day he's clean. And on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the door of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall offer one for a kata'ah, and the other for an olah. And the priest shall make a covering before Yehovah for the discharge of her uncleanliness. Thus you shall separate Israel's seed from their uncleanliness, lest they die in their uncleanliness when they defile my tent. No, my tabernacle. This is where it's used. Look at this. This is the Mishkan. When they defile my Mishkan. Coming in unclean. We've got to guard against that. Their uncleanliness when they defile my tabernacle. Thus you shall separate Israel's seed from their uncleanliness, lest they die in their uncleanliness when they defile my Mishkan that is among them. This is the law. Now this is the conclusion that we were talking about. We're in 15. This is what we're talking about here, 15:31 through 33. It's the conclusion. This is the law of one who has a discharge, and for him who emits semen and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her nadah, and for the one who has a discharge, either a man or a woman, and for him who lies with her who is unclean. Covering all the things that we've gone through regarding issues. We don't lie with a woman who has an ongoing issue. Going to get you kicked out. All right, well, this is all about what? We just set it up here. Lest they die in their uncleanliness when they defile my Mishkan. Who's the they? We're talking about Israel's seed. Let's understand that. Next week, we're going to talk about this. The Day of Coverings, Yom Kippurim. What's going on this day? Why do we use 2 goats? Why is it that Christians always want to make goats bad and sheep good? We're using 2 goats. One is going to be killed before Yehovah. One is going to be released into the wilderness. They're going to be chosen by Lot. Why Lot? Well, we'll talk about all those things next week. It's a very interesting subject. If we get a chance, we may go on to 17, which talks about the food, the clean food that we're going to eat and how it's supposed to be killed. This really changed my diet several years ago when I saw this. I'm going to review it again. We've got some things that we need to learn. There's more to the story. Well, hey, thank you for joining me today. I so appreciate you being here. We'll see you again next week. Love you tons. Bye now.